Welcome to Sakshi TV special immigration show with attorney Mr. Parvathaneni from Managing Attorney at law firm of Parvathaneni and Brown. Please note that Sakshi TV now has 3 immigration shows every week on Thursdays at 5 p.m. EST with attorney Parvathaneni, Wednesdays at 5:30 p.m. EST with attorney Prashanti Reddy in English, and on Fridays at 6 p.m. EST with Banu and Indra. Please tune in to ask your questions. If you are an immigration attorney and would like to join our special shows, please email us at usc@sakshi.com or call us at 8667257441. Before we begin the show, please note that the information provided on the show is not legal advice and for general informational purposes only. Sakshi TV or its agents will not be responsible for the use of information. If you need specific legal advice, please contact the attorney directly. Mr. Chan needs no introduction, but if you need consultation, please log on to spplawfirm.com site for contact information. When you connect with them, don't forget to mention Sakshi TV. From the beginning, spplawfirm.com site has put a wealth of free information and online tools in the hands of the immigrant community and for the benefit of the US employers. The www.spplawfirm.com site provides you with the latest and the cutting-edge information on US laws and policies explained in terms you do not have to be a lawyer to understand. We will continue the knowledge section along with the news and updates on latest immigration followed by Q&A. Before we get into the topic, you can call us on the numbers on the screen for questions related to immigration and also ask for tips. Today's topic is H1B and F1 visa issues at consulates in India. So without any further delay, let's welcome him onto our show. Mr. Parvathaneni, I hope you're doing amazing. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Shivani, and thank you to all the wonderful viewers of Sakshi TV for joining in today.
Yes. Mr. Parvathaneni Garu, before we get onto the topic, are there any latest immigration updates that the viewers must know?
So there are two important updates this week. One is the H1B lottery. So the H1B lottery just was over this Monday. And as a matter of fact, the lottery got extended by 3 days. Initially, the plan was to stop at March 17th. And USCIS announced March 17th as the last day. And there was some glitch in the system. So in the system, there was some payment issue and they extended the deadline by 3 days. And that gave some additional time. And the registration process just ended on March 20th. And that's one thing. And the next couple of months will be busy with the H1B filings. And another important update is the visa bulletin. So the visa bulletin for the next month, April 2023, just got released this week. And the bulletin is not really favorable to India. So the bulletin, we are seeing retrogression. So the EB2 dates, they really went back a lot. They went back by 8 months. And the retrogression is not really a good sign, even for the future predictions. But overall, EB2 category, the dates have moved back. And that's another update we have this week.
Yes. So, Mr. Parvathaneni, let's get on to our topic. It's pretty simple, but today we thought we'll discuss from the basics. And can you exactly explain about what exactly is an H1B and how can one get an H1B?
Sure. So H1B is basically a non-immigrant visa category. So it's a non-immigrant visa category that is used by various US employers to hire foreign workers. And it is not to hire any foreign workers, but to hire very, very specialized foreign workers. And they can only hire them in a field that requires theoretical or a technical expertise. And the H1B visa program. So this is a program that is administered by US Citizenship and Immigration Services. And what this means is a case needs to be filed with USCIS and USCIS needs to approve the H1B. So that's what we normally mean by H1B. And again, but there is an additional step. There is also a visa step. So even after one gets H1B approval, if somebody is outside the country, if somebody is outside USA, there is an additional step called the visa, the H1B visa. So the H1B visa is actually the actual document that lets a foreign worker enter the United States. So even if somebody gets approval from USCIS, they cannot just use that to enter US. They actually have to go to the embassy. They have to get an approval. They get something called a visa stamp on their passport. And that is the document that they have to use at the airlines. They have to show that to the airlines to be boarded onto the flight and that visa copy on the passport. That is something what is needed when they enter United States. So basically, the H1B is the visa category that happens on the US side, where USCIS approves the case, and the visa is the part where the foreign worker gets from the embassy, the foreign embassy, the US embassy in the foreign country, and then uses that to enter United States.
Yes. So, Mr. Parvathaneni, now is it important that the H1B, people who are applying for H1B go through an interview process, or can they directly get it once they go meet the consulate?
So, so in the past, always one had to go to an interview, the H1B interview, to get a visa. However, what has happened is due to COVID, due to various staffing challenges, the embassies, recently last year, they gave something called a Dropbox feature. So the Dropbox feature is something where if somebody had any kind of visa in the past, maybe a student visa, maybe a tourist visa, any kind of a US visa, they get something called an interview waiver. So what that means is they don't have to go for the interview. So they just simply walk into the consulate and drop their passport, and they're able to get their visa. So majority of the people nowadays are utilizing this feature where the interview is waived. But for some people who are not eligible for the Dropbox, they are still required to go to the consulate. They are still required to appear in person for the in-person interview and obtain a visa. And even for the Dropbox, some people are still, even after going for the Dropbox, because they qualify, sometimes they're being asked to come back for the in-person interview. So even within the Dropbox, some people could always get called back for an interview. Overall, that is what is happening nowadays. Some people go for Dropbox, some people go for interview, and some people who are really eligible for a Dropbox are still getting called for an interview.
Yes. So, Mr. Parvathaneni, what are the most common questions that people who go to the H1B interview are asked? So, can you just give us a list of questions that are pretty common, and the viewers must make sure that they're a little prepared to it?
Sure. So, if one is applying for a H1B visa and selected for an interview, because again, some people could always get through with a Dropbox, but those that get called for an interview, which is probably the majority of the people even now, they should be prepared for a range of questions from the consular officer. And the consulate officer, they are going to ask questions to determine the eligibility and to make sure everything is all right. And so overall, what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure the employee is qualified. They're trying to make sure the company is qualified. They're trying to make sure there is no criminal history. They're trying to make sure there is no medical issues that could cause a problem in the country. So there are various kinds of questions that get asked, and we can categorize them into a couple of main questions. And the main questions always revolve around the main thing is, what is the purpose of somebody's travel to United States? So always the questions start off with what is their purpose, and questions about the job opportunity. The H1B visa, it's a visa used by the employees to go to United States and work in the country. So a common question is, how did you find about this job opportunity? So they do want to know, is it a legitimate opportunity? How did the employee even find out about an opportunity that's in a foreign country, in US? So very common question. And a very common question is regarding the educational qualifications. They can always be expected to ask questions about education. What kind of an educational background do they have? And how does it relate to the job that they are going to perform in the United States? So this is a very common question. Work experience. So they can be asked to describe their work experience and how is it relevant to their job in the United States. So the work experience is something that even the employers look before they sponsor the H1B visas. And again, this is a question that comes up very often in the visa interviews. What kind of experience do you have? And do you have an experience letter, or do you have pay statements? Or what is the relevance of your work experience to your job? So questions revolving around their current experience in India. Very, very common question, and people should be ready with the accurate answer. And they're also very frequently asked about the company. So what is the name of the company that offered you this job, who is sponsoring your H1? What is its location? What is the nature of their business, what are their assignments, and so on. So very common questions about the company that has sponsored somebody's H1. And another very common question is the job title, the duties, and what they would do in the United States. So if somebody is working as a software developer, say in Microsoft, they can say, okay, what is your job title? What exactly are your duties? What exactly are you going to do in the United States? A brief summary of their duties. They don't expect a whole big technical answer, but more of a summary of what they would be doing in terms of their job. They're definitely going to get asked about their salary, and if the salary is meeting the LCA requirements and so on. They are also frequently asked about where they intend to stay in the United States. What city do they plan to stay? Do they have they made their plans, or how are they going to start finding an apartment or a house once they get into the United States? Their plans, their long-term plans, and so on. And nowadays, a common question we are seeing is regarding the fees. Did you pay the filing fees to your employer? Did you pay anything to your employer? That's a common question we are seeing. And one very important thing that all should remember is one cannot pay any fees, legal fees, or the filing fees for the H1B. And this is something what the officer wants to make sure. So the officers are definitely asking this question: did you pay for the H1B filing fees, or did your employer make you pay for the H1B filing fees? So, and it is very important that one answers all these questions truthfully, and any additional documentation that the consular officer wants, that should be provided immediately. And doing so, one can increase the chances of getting a H1B visa hassle-free. And the big thing everybody should remember is make sure you answer everything truthfully, accurately, and honestly. Any misrepresentation would cause long-term issues with your visas.
Yes. So, Mr. Parvathaneni, a lot of people who actually get their H1Bs are usually, students who've lived for pretty like 2 or 3 years in the USA, and they were on the F1 visa. So, will the consulates ask about the work history that they've worked, when they were a student, ask a little about the student life? Or maybe, go and ask anything about the subject. So let's say I've studied data science, and will they ask anything related to the academics?
Sure. So if the officer sees that somebody was in US previously, either as a tourist, either as a H4, or either as a student, it is very common to see the officers raise questions and ask about their previous status. So for example, somebody is a student. Very commonly, we see questions asked about their academics and also their experience. So we constantly see officers ask about where did you work when you were a student or after you finished your studies? What kind of courses did you take? And one has to be very, very cautious, because the officer is trying to make sure that they have followed whatever they're supposed to do during their F1, the student status. They want to make sure the employee went to the school, because everybody who is on F1 visa, they're supposed to attend college, make sure they are getting the passing grades and so on. They're also supposed to make sure that they don't have any unauthorized employment on their record. They're also supposed to make sure during their OPT period, they're supposed to make sure they actually worked in the right occupation with a legitimate employer. So there are certain rules. So the officer is definitely going to ask about their work experience during their student status, their academics during their student status, because their goal is to make sure, did they follow the rules of the F1 visa? Did they do what they're supposed to do? Did they have any illegal employment? And so on. And when the officer finds that somebody has done something that is not right, we occasionally see people getting misrepresentation and fraud bars. This is very, very important, because if there is some issue and the officer finds about that issue, any misrepresentation, especially, the officers will issue a bar. So anytime anybody has any issue in the past, definitely consult an attorney and make sure you don't misrepresent anything with a consulate officer. As long as there is no misrepresentation and as long as there is a legitimate reason on what has happened, typically the officers will be fine. Okay, so the misrepresentation is something one has to be cautious, and everybody has to make sure they are prepared to answer questions about their previous stay, previous studies, and previous work experience in US.
Yes. So, Mr. Parvathaneni, when people are dealing with the H1Bs, they get to hear this word called as the 221G. So, in context of the H1Bs, can you please explain what exactly is the 221G to the viewers watching the show?
So a lot of people who get 221G immediately panic and think it's a refusal. It's a blanket refusal. So 221G it's technically a refusal, but it is not a complete refusal. It is typically a hold. It is more like a temporary hold that is placed on a H1B application by whoever is the consular officer who is looking at the file. So what it means is the officer is not satisfied. So he's not going to issue the visa at that time, but he's refusing the visa because he's going to take more time to review the documentation to make a decision. So it is more of a temporary hold, and we have to wait until the consular officer is going to finish the entire process, the back end process. And typically, when a 221G hold is placed, the consular officer, he or she, they will always typically issue a written notice. So this written notice will say, you have been issued a 221G, and we either require some additional documentation, and if so and so documents are supposed to be provided, or sometimes they say no documents are required, we just need to do a background check or some additional administrative processing. And so the goal is, like, when anybody goes for a stamping, consulate stamping, they should take some steps that that could avoid a 221G. And so the things that could lead to a 221G are something like the applicant has no sufficient evidence of their qualifications or their work experience. So during those cases, 221G could be issued. So what needs to be done is make sure you carry all your educational documents, you carry your work experience documents, and you are able to explain how the correlation or the nexus between your experience, your education, and the job. So if you're not carrying that evidence, you're at risk for a 221G. And another common case is when they don't really have sufficient evidence of what they will do in US. So what we suggest is the employee should talk to the employer, make sure they have the right documentation. What exactly is their assignment? What is their job function? What project or what client they would be working with the day they land in US. So carry this documentation. So when the officer is asking these questions, somebody is able to demonstrate and explain clearly to the officer what is the inherent job position in US. So doing so, you will minimize your chances of 221G. But sometimes what happens is, in spite of everything being good, the officer might have some concerns in general about the employer or the employee, and they just want to do further background checks. In that case, you cannot really do anything. And at that time, it is just a waiting game. You just let the officer do his part, which is basically do the background checks and wait for the holds to be lifted off. Okay, so the big thing is 221G is not a complete refusal. It is just a temporary hold, and it is going to delay the processing. So you might have to wait for about a month to 2 months. And on an average, we see in 2 months, most of the 221Gs getting cleared. And if it takes more than two months, definitely reach out to the consulate, ask the employer to reach out to the consulate, and see if anything is holding up the decision.
Yes. Now that you've mentioned a little about the processing time for 221G, so let's say how long exactly, what's the minimum and the most maximum amount of time it will take to resolve the whole 221G issue?
So the 221Gs, so there is no anticipated time, but what the consulates, the Department of State says is, give them 8 weeks, 2 months of time. So give them 60 days and wait for their processing to be over. And in 60 days, because sometimes they have to do some background checks, they have to maybe call the client, maybe call the landlord of the employer, whoever has leased the office space, or sometimes maybe they have to do some additional checks, some other additional checks. So the consulate, in general, they say give them 60 days. So give them 60 days, and sometimes they do it quickly. Maybe in 2-3 weeks they're done. Sometimes they take more time. On an average, everyone has to give them 60 days. And in 60 days, most of the cases that I see get resolved. But there are some cases which don't get resolved even after 60 days. And sometimes we have seen them take as long as 1 year for some rare cases, not common, but rare cases. So after 60 days, what we recommend is contact the consulate. Keep contacting them every week. Every week, especially it's better if the employer contacts them, because if the employer still has the job open, let the employer call or email the consulate, the appropriate consulate, and ask them for a status update. Maybe they are looking for some documents. Ask the consulate if they are waiting on some documents. Keep doing this frequently, every week if possible. After 2 months. So if you ask me the average is about 2 months is when majority of the 221Gs get cleared.
Yes. So, Mr. Parvathaneni, is it true that some people get the 221G more than a couple of times? Is it true that, I've read somewhere that a person got rejected 4 times, rejected in a sense, have gotten their 221G 4 times, but they still, in the end, they got their H1B and now are successfully citizens of USA. So can you please tell, is it common that you get rejected quite a couple of times? And is it possible that they can still get their H1Bs?
Right. So definitely, I mean, a 221G does not mean that something wrong is happening. All a 221G means is they were unable to demonstrate to the consular officer that they're qualified for the visa, or the officer is not satisfied, maybe with the employer, maybe with the employee, or some other reason. So just getting a 221G does not mean they will not have any future approvals. So normally, if somebody gets a 221G, for example, maybe something is wrong with the company, for example, they're eligible to go and find a new employer, and the new employer can file H1B, for example. So they can go for stamping again, maybe with the new employer after fixing the problems that have been reported in the past. So people can definitely go for stamping multiple times after clearing the issue that caused them the refusal the first time. So it could happen that somebody might have got 221Gs for multiple times or refusal multiple times, but eventually were able to get a visa. So it is definitely possible. And that's what we say is when somebody comes with a 221G, a 221G does not mean they are barred in the future. All that means is the officer is not satisfied. And even after the 221G, down the line, they might get approval, or say even after the 221Gs, in a few months, the consulate comes and says they're refusing the visa for that particular petition. They can always have a new employer file a new fresh petition and again try at the consulate. So as long as they are not doing anything wrong, there is no fraud involved, there is no misrepresentation, they can go multiple times and they could be successful. And this is also true with the F1 visa. People go for stamping. Sometimes they get denied multiple times, but eventually they can be successful. So all that means is anytime anybody gets a denial, they have to look at the reasons, see what has gone wrong, try to rectify the reasons, and then reappear if they're able to fix the problem.
Yes. So, Mr. Parvathaneni, when do you suggest people to go and check with the follow-up of the 221G with USCIS? And also, is there anything called as the premium processing for 221G?
So when it comes to the 221Gs, this is what is happening at the consulate. And everything at the consulate comes under Department of State. So these are just like we have different ministries in India, in the central government. So similarly, in the federal government in US, they call them departments. So Department of State is the department that deals with the consulate. So this department does not deal with USCIS. So USCIS is the one that approves the H1B visas in US. They come under Department of Homeland Security. So it's the consulate is totally a different department from USCIS. And anytime we hear about the 221G, that means the consulate has a problem, not USCIS. USCIS might be happy with the H1B, which is why they approved the H1B. But the consulate, which comes under Department of State, they have an issue. So that is what it typically means. And normally when there is an issue with 221G, what we suggest is we ask the employer to work with the consulate. Or if a lawyer is involved, we contact the consulate and see if the things can be rectified. Sometimes things can be rectified, and sometimes, unfortunately, things cannot be rectified. And when things cannot be rectified, typically the most common option is maybe find a different employer. Maybe there is something wrong with the petition. So maybe find a different employer if you don't know what the underlying issue is. If not, what we suggest is keep contacting the consulate until they take a decision. Either they deny the visa or approve the visa.
Yes. So, Mr. Parvathaneni, are you saying that there are many other alternatives for the 221G? And also, does that mean that a couple of or if a case is like rejected, it is meant that the H1B is cancelled, or there is no way that you will get that you will get a H1B in future?
So even after a 221G, if so there is another process. So at the end of this entire process, so maybe it takes a couple of months, the consulate will say whether they're approving the visa or denying the visa. Say they deny the visa. If they deny the visa, normally what happens is they send it back to the consulate, and depending on the situation, sometimes they call for revocation. That is the time when you know if there is some fraud or they're just not satisfied with the evidence. If there is some fraud or if there is some misrepresentation, typically it means that the future petitions could be a problem for that employee, which is why you have to look at the reason. Are they saying the employee did something wrong, or are they saying the employer is the one that did something wrong? So if there is misrepresentation from the employee, the person who went for a visa stamping, they might have a problem in the future. But assuming whoever went for the visa stamping, if they have not done anything wrong, they have not misrepresented anything, there is no fraud from the employee's side, what that means is even if the petition is revoked, they can always look for a transfer, and they should be able to get a transfer done. But so the whole thing boils down to after the denial, did they find any fraud or misrepresentation with the employee or not? If there is no misrepresentation or any issue from the employee side, they are fine. I mean, they can look for a future petition from another employer in the future, and more than likely they'll be able to get the future petition, assuming everything is all right with the future petitions.
Yes. Finally, Mr. Parvathaneni, is there anything that you want to say to the viewers watching the show right now?
Sure. So the main thing about the visas is the visas are given by the Department of State, by the US embassies in the foreign countries. And what that means is the embassies, they have rules that keep changing time to time. So one has to constantly look at the embassy website, make sure they're following all the rules. For example, the Hyderabad consulate, they just moved to a new office recently. So things like that. So be on the lookout for the recent updates, recent news with the embassy that you are going to go for a stamping. That is very important. Look at their website to make sure you are carrying all the documents that are required for the visa stamping. So that is very important. And make sure there is no misrepresentation, because at the time of the interview, the officer asks for a lot of information. They ask a lot of questions. And normally what happens is sometimes people are not sure what the exact answer is. And if somebody is not sure about the exact answer, that is what they should be telling the officer, that they're not sure about the answer. They should not make up some answers which are false statements. It is highly important that nobody makes any false statements with any US government officer, because that is perjury. So to avoid that, if somebody does not know the right answer, they should tell the officer that we are not sure about the answer, rather than come up with some answer that can be construed as a false statement. That is very important. So what that means is do your best at the visa interviews. Give only the truthful and accurate statements. Something happens, if the officer is not satisfied, you can always go back. You can always reapply for the visa stamping and clear the issue. Because as long as you only give the accurate and honest answers, as long as there is no claim of misrepresentation, one visa denial will not cause issues with the future visa applications. So as a whole, if they do that, they are prepared with the questions that are getting asked. They know what documents to take. I think they'll be in a good shape. And we wish the best for everybody that is going for a visa stamping at the US consulate.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Parvathaneni Garu, for tuning on to our show. We did cover a very interesting topic. Thank you for the viewers for tuning in. You're watching Sakshi TV with me, Shivani Raj.